Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on IDAGIO. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly show in which I get the great pleasure of chatting with guests in the classical music world about risk-taking in classical music and what pushing boundaries is or thinking outside the box. Today, I'm joined by composer, pianist, and writer Stephen Hough. Stephen has appeared with the major orchestras of the world and has given recitals at the major, most prestigious concert halls and music festivals. He has recorded over 60 albums, many award-winning, several Grammy-nominated. As a composer, he's been commissioned by the Berlin Philharmonic, Wigmore Hall, the BBC Symphony, to name a few, and composes music for choir, orchestra, vocal music, chamber music, and piano. He has written 3 books and contributes regularly to publications such as The Guardian, The Times, The Gramophone, and Telegraph. It's such a pleasure to have him on the show today. Please welcome Stephen Hough. Hello, Stephen. Welcome.
Rachel, very nice to see you. Hello, everyone else who's listening.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for being here. Stephen, I love to begin by asking my guests what their earliest introductions to music were, and whether there were any particular musical memories which jump out to you that you feel are quite pivotal for you as a musician.
Well, Rachel, I come from a completely non-musical household. We had no classical records in the house. We might have had a couple of LPs. I think we might have had a Frank Sinatra one and maybe some Irish folk music or whatever, but nothing really. But I had an aunt who had a piano, and when I visited her, I would go over to the piano and I would try and play some tunes. Apparently, I knew 70 nursery rhymes when I was 2 years old, according to my father. I obviously don't remember this, and I can't remember 70 now, but I begged my parents for lessons and to get a piano, and they said no for the longest time. They bought me a little toy piano, 1 octave, and that wasn't very satisfactory. But eventually, they bought me a piano and I started piano lessons, and that's really how it started. So I can pinpoint very much that first earliest musical memory. And in fact, I'm writing about it right now. I'm writing a book about those very years. And so I've been thinking about all of this and looking at some notes that I found from my father's papers. And so it's been quite interesting for me.
Oh, wow. Is that going to be a book or an essay or?
It is, yes.
Okay.
I have a commission from Faber to write this book, so I've been working a lot on it in the last few months. And I mean, the first draft is almost there, but there's a long way to go. But it's been interesting to delve into the past like that.
Oh, wow. That's really exciting. I'm looking forward to reading it. You're one of these talented pianist composers, very enviable in so many ways. And I'm so curious what that relationship is like for you as a composer and pianist. Where do you feel like the roles of pianist and composer sort of intersected? Where do they diverge for you?
I think they both come from the same creative source, really. And certainly, I remember when I started reading music in those very early years, I started writing music as well. It just seemed like a very natural thing, like reading and writing. You know, you don't learn to read and don't think, well, I won't write. Somehow the two go together. And I think this is something actually I would love to encourage in more students.
Mhm.
Anyone who can read music can write music. Now, we may not all be Mozarts, but the actual technique of writing music on the page is a technique. You can learn to write a fugue, like you can learn
Right.
to write an essay. I mean, you may not write the greatest essays, but you can at least write them. So I think this is something which was there in the very earliest years. I let it slip when I started playing concerts for a while, partly because I was discouraged, partly because I thought, well, I've got too many other things to do. I had to learn 13 concertos in 1 year, and you know there just isn't time
Yeah.
to write music. But I came back to it a lot of the time through writing transcriptions, little pieces that I wrote as encores, transcriptions of songs. I did some Richard Rodgers arrangements. And gradually over the years, I came back through the encouragement of people like John Corigliano, the composer, and others. I came back to writing original music. And then in the last, I guess, 15 years, 20 years, I've written a huge amount of music, actually. I was sort of astonished when I wrote a list down of it not so long ago, how many pieces there were. And writing, working on. In fact, today I spent the whole day working on a string quartet that I'm writing for the Takash Quartet. They're premiering that later in this year and recording it next year. So now it's a very important part of my life, and it gives me great joy, if not the people who listen to it. I have nothing to do with, but I certainly get lots out of writing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a great point that I love this parallel of reading and writing because, and it's so true that um, it's about kind of just navigating the language and being able to, um, yeah, just simply being able to do it, whether you actually become a composer or you feel particularly creative in that way.
And I think you do think differently about music when you've written it yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm listening to students, I'm thinking, yeah, why do you not do what the composer wrote, for instance? You've
Right.
actually struggled yourself over where do I put that hairpin in the bar? And you put it between these notes, and then you think, no, I need to put it earlier because the climax of the phrase comes here. And if I don't put it there, then I don't think the performer will. All these little details of how you think about music, I think, feed into the way you play other people's music.
Definitely. I experienced that myself. I don't compose anymore, but I did study composition when I was younger and did it a little bit. And I often feel that way, particularly with art song,
Yeah.
thinking, okay, I actually have to pay attention here. um, I'm curious, also as a composer yourself, how do you feel, or has your sort of musical value or aesthetical values, have they changed or evolved over the years? How do you feel that they might have?
Well, I think we're changing every day, aren't we, as human beings? We literally, they tell us every 7 years, we literally, every cell in our bodies changes. So, that's on a physiological level. But I think also we're always, and that's what keeps everything fresh. And I might hear something on a car radio, in a taxi sometime on the radio, hear a snatch of something, a popular song that gives me some sort of idea, or someone sends me a link to some piece that I've never heard before, or we're constantly changing it with music and also with words. We read something, we think of something, and it changes the way we think about things. I just saw on Twitter 10 minutes ago something Joe Biden said in his speech today about profiting from lies. And of course, I never thought of that before quite as distinctly as that. The idea as that you build something on a false foundation, and it's a very
Yes.
profound thought, that actually, that because I don't think in the end in our lives we can profit from a lie. I think a lie is always going to be a false foundation, and in the end it will crumble. And so that was one little thought that's changed my mind today. So, and I think with composing and with playing, as our bodies change every 7 years, nevertheless, the me remains. Whether we
Yeah.
think of that as our soul, as something which is immaterial, that the body works around, I think that's true with our music as well. My musical interpretations are changing all the time, and my music is changing all the time. But I think I can still trace a thread through. I still feel about music in the same way now that I did when I was 5 years old and I heard my first piece of Chopin, for instance, and it brought tears to my eyes. I still have the same connection with music today, I think, that I did then, and I hope I will for the rest of my years on this earth.
Yeah. I read that you have a new song cycle in the works that's being commissioned, I think by Wigmore Hall and 92nd Street. Why is that right?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually finished, and it's with all the people. Also, the Tippett Rise series in
Okay. Okay.
the three of them commissioned that for tenor. I guess all soprano, although the verses, many of them are very. I guess the poetry is quite male in the sense that it's. I think of someone like W.H. Auden writing about sexual desire being a very male gay thing, but I don't know. These days, things can go all over the place.
I think so.
Very happy to hear a soprano sing these songs. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, they're called songs of love and loss, and they're all from poetry about love and loss. I mean, particularly the way that relationships go cold, change. That's change in a very different way. There are two main poets. I begin and end with W.B. Yeats, and then two poems about relationships, literally in old age, what it's like to be with someone for many, many years. And even though the fire has gone out of the relationship, still there's an incredible connection underneath the embers. And then there's this big poem of W.H. Auden in the middle. And then the other poetry is by friends of mine, actually. Not all of them professional poets at all. I set three poems by Andrew Ball, who was the head of keyboard at the Royal College of Music in London, and who is now not very well, and he's been writing poetry now that he no longer plays the piano. One by the person who founded Tippett Rise, who is a poet, Peter Halstead, Jonathan Galassi, who is the publisher of Farrar, Straus and Giroux, who's also a most wonderful poet. I said one of his poems, and then also Tom Vaughan, who's a friend of mine in London. So it's quite a mixed bag. There's a patter song in the style of Noel Coward. There are three very serious art song style settings, the Yeats and the Auden. There's a jazzy one because Tom Vaughan's poem is called Beltway Blues, and so I set that in a kind of bluesy, jazzy way. Andrew Ball's poems are crazy, sort of dark humor about someone bringing him some kitchen tongs as a present for dinner. And every time he uses them, he thinks of the arms of the boy that he can't love anymore around his waist. So kitchen tongs symbolizing an embrace, which is crazy and wonderful. And so, yeah, it's a real eclectic mix. But I hope that the sense of loss, of love and loss, comes through there, through all of those poems.
And when you're working on this kind of song cycle, particularly that it's different writers and poets, different texts, do you have a particular system when you're writing a song? As in, do you sort of write the music for, how do the music and text intersect? Is there one that comes before the other, or?
I'm not sure there's an actual design here. I mean, I wrote Rilke settings for German texts, and those are all based on the same motive, all 5 songs. It's called Herbstlieder. And the first one I set was the last in the cycle, which is the famous poem called Herbst. And I have this falling motive symbolizing that poem about the falling of the leaves and everything falling. And so I use that motive throughout all of the poems. So that's very much an integrated musical inspiration. But this one certainly is, they're so wildly different that. But I hope that somehow there's something which is holding them together beyond actually a musical motive.
Yeah.
So it would be very different, really, depending on the text I'm setting. I think song cycles are the most marvelous unified form because literally they can go in every direction, and it's a little bit like a mosaic. You know, sometimes a mosaic, the pieces are all the same shape, and sometimes they're wildly different, and they're a bit glass, and there are old bits of pottery, and there might be a bit of cardboard stuck in there too, and it can be a real mishmash. And so I like having that. I think the song cycle is almost the most diverse form that you can have.
Oh, I love that, actually. Yeah, that I haven't thought about that before, but
it's together 2 completely different art forms, aren't you? The word and music, and you're putting them together and hoping that they fit together. And I love that because sometimes the fact that the fit is not so obvious, it makes it even more powerful when it finally comes together.
And of course, as a composer and as a performer, you can experiment so much with how much of it is a narrative or how much is dramatic and how much is actually abstract as well, and sound and yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Something I like to chat about in the series on this show a lot is sort of the idea of what the role of classical music is in society today and how it's evolved, where it could use evolving towards. And I wanted to ask you a few questions. And of course, I really enjoyed reading your recent book, Rough Ideas, which is just essentially like a lot of these questions. And I would love to read a quote from the book for our audience, if that's fine with you, and then and then hear some of your thoughts, because this just really really sat with me, struck me. So you say classical music has a special knack for putting certain things into perspective. To listen to play music written up to 500 years ago and still find its voice utterly contemporary is to experience a telescopic human experience. Unlike some forms of entertainment, classical music is not escapism. We don't leave behind our deepest longings for the length of a concert. Rather, we explore with the composer the most profound part of our being. Music heals. It is an antibiotic, not a painkiller. And this quote it's so wonderful. This is such a, and it made me think that it's so apt, and in many ways it feels we have still a long way to go in sort of achieving that perspective. I wanted to just hear some of your thoughts about that, about going towards music as a healing versus what it sometimes gets stuck in with entertainment.
Wow, well, it's a very big area, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, if I can really give you a succinct answer, I think we'd solve the problems of the world.
Okay.
No, I think there are many different aspects to this. I think the fact that we're even asking these questions is already a good start to solving them, because for many years, perhaps, for the first 60 years of the 20th century, it wasn't really a question. And people took concerts for granted. They happened, they were pretty full. Records sold really well, and it wasn't a problem in the sense that you know privileged middle class people got on with their lovely concert lives, and they didn't really care about anyone else not getting into this, and that was fine. But I think we're now looking at this and we're saying, yes, but this music is too wonderful just to be a conventional form of entertainment. That every Saturday night I have my season ticket for the symphony and I go and I think nothing more of it.
Yeah.
Now I don't want to take that away, because I also write in the book about how I love old audiences. And I think it's very dangerous when we start talking about how can we get young people interested
Mhm.
and neglect the people who already are interested, because we want everyone.
Yeah.
Uh, and this music is for everyone. It's
Yeah.
for people of every racial background, every financial background, everything. There's something in music for everyone. Now, everyone's not going to like it, and that's also great. It's not a failure of us or of them if people say, I just don't like concerts, or I don't like Beethoven, or whatever it is. But I think what we need to do is to keep exploring ways in which we can bring new audiences in, because we have a really wonderful treasure. And it's not really about changing the treasure. I'm not saying we've got it all right, but I don't think we should be scared and saying, oh my goodness, we don't have audiences, therefore we have to change everything about what we do. And this, we don't want to be playing this boring, making a concert like a museum anymore. No, a concert is in a way like a museum, but museums are places of radical exploration. They're not boring places. When you go to see, as I did a few years ago, the Caravaggio Rembrandt show, I mean, my gosh, this is explosive. Yes, these guys are long dead and the art is very old, and hundreds of years we've had it, but it's still radical and it still has an incredible message for us. And the violence behind a Caravaggio canvas is still like a bomb today. But the secret is, how do we get people to understand that? And how do we get as many people as we can to come into our concerts and to find this music exciting? And I think there are many ways of doing that. And I don't think there's going to be one way of doing it. And I've written quite a bit, and actually recently, about changing concert format, perhaps, of getting rid of the interval
Yeah.
at different times of the night, so it's not always 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and it doesn't always last 2 hours,
Mhm.
20-minute gap in the middle. I mean, that's the traditional format. It's fine, we can keep it, but let's do other things as well. And I think this is something where we do need to start exploring. We don't all have the same 9 to 5 jobs as we did 50 years ago. The world
Yeah.
has changed, people work from home, and of course, particularly now, that's probably not going to change, and we're going to have a lot of people working from home and changing their hours. And so let's explore how that can work more and how we can work with that more in changing our formats.
Mhm.
And of course,
Mhm.
exploring more new music, music by minorities, music from places that we never dreamt we could before. I'm certainly influenced and interested in different musics. When I was writing my second piano sonata, my godson was a DJ at the time, and I said to him, "Now I want you to play me some of the wildest music you have ever heard in your nightclub, you know." And so he was about 18 at the time, and he was really delighted, but playing me some crazy stuff. And I found that very inspiring in the writing of my second sonata, which is very much about nightlife in a city. Um, I don't quote from it, but it gave me a certain sense of that. I love South American popular music. If I'm going to
Mhm.
listen to pop music, I'd much rather hear pop music from Brazil than I would from the UK. I think it's much
Okay.
more creative and much more interesting and rhythmically, harmonically more interesting. So I think this is something that also we can explore more. We get music from different backgrounds, and I think that's something that now. So I'm on the faculty of Juilliard
Right.
and this is something that we've been exploring very much in the last year. Um, and I think that's very exciting. Music, of course, by women composers. Um, all of this,
Mhm.
not to be trendy about it, but just because some of it's really good, and we should be listening to it, and we should be enjoying it, and still with our sense of standards. Everything that's from a minority background isn't good, and everything that we've listened to in the past isn't good. We need to mix and match and be creative and honest and open. I think
Yeah.
those I'm sort of interested in.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you feel like through the lens of Corona time specifically that you question these things or have been able to question them in different ways? I mean, because there's this sort of pause and this ability to sort of look at what we're doing in a different way.
I think that's very true. I mean, I did make this suggestion about these shorter concerts without intervals and repeating them on the same night before the Corona period.
Okay.
That's something we've all been doing and had to do.
Yeah.
A concert series where we could only have a few people in the hall, and so I did the same recital program 3 times in the same evening. I did a 5:30 show, a 7 o'clock show, and an 8:30 show. And I loved it, I have to say. And it was a bit like being a jazz musician with their sets, that they would come and do the same set. And I've long thought that this would be a better idea. I've envied the arts, the drama world, which repeats their programs. Because sometimes, and especially in London, where we don't have repeats of shows, in America, they very often will have certainly two and often 3 or 4 orchestral concerts in a week. You'll go and you'll play the same program a number of times. And it's wonderful because you put all that rehearsal time in and then you play it once and then you leave town. It seems a waste really of all that work and all that effort that's gone in. And I think the Corona time has forced us precisely to do that, to play something more than once. And I think we're going to keep that going. I've spoken to a number of concert presenters, and they've really found this a positive aspect because some people will come at 7 and eat after the concert. Other people want to eat first and then come to a later concert. Um, I have this big idea of that I want restaurants and concert halls to join together and offer packages. So you pay and you get a meal and a concert as part of the same package. I think it could benefit both institutions actually.
Certainly.
You'll know this as a performer. Sometimes with a concert, it's very hard to eat.
Yes.
I did some concerts in Tasmania, and they ended, and there weren't many restaurants open midweek in Hobart, and I literally had to run from the stage door to catch the Argentinian restaurant across the road before I left the kitchen, because otherwise I would have nothing to eat. So that's crazy, and I think midweek we have to realize that people have families, they don't all live in the center of town, some of them have an hour commute, and so
Yeah.
it's great to have this flexibility.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly after this pandemic, because all of those industries will benefit from this. I mean, everyone's suffering, so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I was curious to hear, I mean, we spoke about it a little bit before we went live, but kind of thinking about the landscape also musically, sort of post-Brexit and what that looks like for musicians within the EU. And I was just wondering how you feel that might affect sort of the landscape as a performer in the EU, and what might some solutions be, kind of.
Yeah, well, I think that, the beauty of the arts is it really is ultimately apolitical. Music can be enjoyed by people from every religious, political belief and background and so on. And that's one of the things that I treasure about it. Of course, we're in the very early days of post Brexit. This is literally the first few weeks.
Yes.
I'm really hoping that everyone benefits from music and the arts traveling freely. I mean, not just because they bring joy to all of us, but they bring money to all of us. If I come to Berlin and play a concert, I pay tax to Germany. So Germany benefits from my visiting Berlin. If a Swiss artist comes to London and plays a concert, they pay the UK government money in tax. So we're all benefiting financially. And money normally talks to political parties. So I think that's part of the argument. But we also gain in prestige because, when English artists come to play in France, we're bringing part of our own culture to you. And there's a prestige and there's a sort of connection here, which is whatever you feel about nationalism or internationalism is a benefit. We all gain from this. And I think that governments will discover this. Now, how we deal with fishing waters, or that's something else. And people are going to fight about that. And I'm glad I don't have anything to do with it. I just hope I have a piece of salmon on my plate from time to time. But, with the arts, I don't see that there can ultimately be a problem. And I'm sure we will find, I mean, the ideal would be to have free travel for artists across the borders. And I think that would be fantastic. If for some reason that can't happen, then perhaps we can have artistic visas that are 10 years long, a little similar to how we have when we travel as Europeans to the United States. I've been
Yeah.
in America now since 1983, and I had to renew my visa every couple of years, but it's pretty seamless. Um,
Mhm.
you have to pay something, but it's not a huge amount. I think
Yeah.
what we'll lose, and this I really think we have to find some other rules, is for freelance orchestral musicians who,
Mhm.
before Brexit, were able to take up gigs very last minute. An oboist is sick in Spain, so
Yeah.
you get on a plane and you can play the concert the next night, and then you come home and nothing has been a problem. You obviously couldn't apply for a visa if you needed to get a visa for every concert that you have. But I think the very least is that we need to have an EU visa in order. I think it would be impossible if we have to negotiate with each country to have a visa for each concert we
Yeah.
play. I think that would literally stop the concerts happening, and I don't think anyone benefits from that. I think musicians throughout the centuries have been used to this wonderful exchange, whether it's Handel coming to live
Mhm.
in London, or Eugene Dalbert going to live in Germany, and it's this wonderful exchange of cultures that has enriched all of us in so many ways. And so I hope we can continue with that in the freest possible
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And I mean, I like I mean, the sort of, let's have hope that these things become apparent, and yeah, it's, Stephen, thank you so much for taking time to chat today and sharing some of your thoughts. It's been so
Thank
lovely having you.
Lovely to chat. Yeah, and I love that little vase of flowers in the background.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
very
I'll just ask you my sort of closing question, hence the title of the show.
yeah.
When and how do you feel music can be revolutionary?
Oh, well, it's revolutionary every time we play it, isn't it? But I think it's revolutionary inside. I think that it, rather than changing the world, it changes hearts. And I think this is something that's been said by many people, isn't it? That it's very easy to go and say, I want this to change in the world, and why isn't this happening, and why aren't you doing this, and why aren't they doing that? But in the end, it comes back to, why aren't I doing this? Because that's really that's the only thing we can control. We can change ourselves, and I think that music plays a part in this. Music brings joy to us, and I think when our hearts are lifted up, then we reach out to other people. And actually, as performers, when we play for people, we're creating this amazing world. We're lifting other people up with us. We're joining with other people in the world that these composers left us and are leaving us, the ones who are still alive. And that's an incredible privilege. And I think that, yeah, the arts can save the world, but it has to happen with each individual person as the music plays.
I love that. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you. And it's not too late to say Happy New Year to everyone who's listening.
Yes, that's very true. Happy New Year to you, and wishing you good health, and stay well in London, and
thank you.
Take care, and thank you again. And thanks everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you.